You've probably seen those pictures, right? These massive, colorful graveyards of twisted-up bicycles. It's become the iconic image of China's bike-sharing boom and bust. It seems like a classic story of a tech bubble bursting, but is that really the whole story? Well, that's what we're here to figure out.
So that's the big question we're tackling. When you see those mountains of abandoned bikes, it is so easy to just write the whole thing off as this colossal failure. But what if that's not the end of the story? What if the reality on the ground today is way more interesting and, you won't believe it, surprisingly successful?
All right, so let's start with that perception. This industry that promised to completely revolutionize how we get around cities, did it really just burn through billions of dollars and then, poof, disappear?
So on the one hand, you have the popular perception, a classic bubble that burst and left nothing but wreckage. But the reality is actually so different. The investment bubble? Oh yeah, that totally burst. But the service itself didn't die. It went through this super messy, chaotic market correction and came out the other side as a stable, everyday utility that people use all the time. That chaos wasn't the end. It was just a very, very messy first chapter.
To really get how things got so out of hand, we've got to look at why investors were throwing so much money at these companies in the first place. And it all kicks off with a very young, very idealistic founder.
This was the vision of Daiwei, the founder of Ofo, one of the two giants in this space. He was a young grad student who saw the bicycle not just as a way to get from point A to B, but as the perfect tool for exploring and understanding the world. He truly believed Ofo wasn't just a business, it was a movement. And believe it or not, this powerful, almost romantic vision is a huge reason why everything fell apart later on.
You see, the ride fees were incredibly cheap, like just a few cents an hour. So how on earth was this supposed to be a billion-dollar business? Well, the answer is that the real value wasn't in the rides at all. It was hidden in two other way more profitable parts of the business model.
Okay, first up, the deposit. To use the service, you had to put down a refundable deposit of 199 yuan. Now get this. Ofo was so clever, they engineered their bikes to cost less than 100 yuan to make. That means, even if a bike got stolen, they could just keep your deposit and still turn a profit. It was a nearly risk-free system for them.
And when you start multiplying that 199 yuan deposit by millions and millions of users, you get an absolutely staggering amount of cash. At its peak, Ofo was sitting on an estimated 3 billion yuan. That's nearly $500 million US just in user deposits. This wasn't just a security fund, it was a massive investment pool, a war chest to generate even more money.
And then you have the second pillar, data, the real gold mine. Just like your ride-hailing app, these bikes were tracking exactly where people were going, right down to the meter. This data on what they call the last kilometer of journey, well, that's pure gold. It could be sold for urban planning, for retail consulting, and it was a top-tier acquisition target for ride-sharing giants like Didi Chuxing, who were desperate to complete their own data maps.
So, you've got this business model that basically prints money and generates priceless data. What do you think happens next? Yep, an absolute land grab. A brutal, all-out war for market dominance.
Now, Ofo and Mobike were the big dogs, but at one point, you had over 70 companies all competing. And because the business model's value was tied to having the most users, the goal was never to coexist. It was to completely eliminate the competition. The strategy was brutal and simple. Deploy more bikes than everyone else, everywhere, so a user would always see your bike first.
And that strategy led to some absolutely insane situations. Just take Beijing. Research showed the city needed about 434,000 shared bikes to run smoothly. At the height of this war, companies had flooded the streets with nearly 2.4 million of them. That is more than 5 times what was needed, and the result was pure chaos. This is exactly where those infamous bike graveyards came from.
Right, so this crazy, unsustainable war just couldn't last. The companies were burning through cash on maintenance and giving away free rides, with no real path to actually making a profit. And then, a series of critical events happened that pushed the entire system right off a cliff.
So let's walk through this, because it all happened really, really fast. In late 2017, investors tried to merge Ofo and Mobike to stop the bleeding, but the deal failed. At the exact same time, Didi, a huge investor that was getting ready to buy Ofo, discovered a fatal secret. Ofo was illegally dipping into those customer deposits to pay its day-to-day bills. Didi pulled out immediately. Then, in January 2018, the media broke the story. Reports came out that Ofo was basically broke, and that triggered a total panic, a classic bank run, with millions of users all trying to get their deposits back at once. It was a death spiral they could never pull out of.
So you've got to be asking, why on earth did that life-saving merger fail? It all came down to a three-way standoff. Most of the investors were desperate to stop burning cash, but Ofo's idealistic founder, Dai was against it on principle, claiming their cultures didn't match. And here's the kicker. The big investor, Didi, also blocked it. Why? For purely strategic reasons. They wanted to buy Ofo themselves for cheap, and a merger would have just driven up the price. This clash of idealism and cold, hard strategy is what doomed the whole deal.
So, in the end, Ofo collapsed, Mobike was sold off for a fraction of its value, the war was over, the giants were gone. So, what was left standing in the rubble?
And this right here is the absolute key takeaway. The speculative investment bubble, it burst. The companies built on that shaky foundation, they failed. But the core idea, convenient, dockless bike sharing, it turned out to be incredibly useful and wildly popular. The service itself actually survived its own creators.
The industry that rose from those ashes looks completely different today. First, that dangerous deposit model is gone. Second, companies now actually cooperate with city governments to make sure they don't flood the streets like before. The fleets are managed sustainably. And finally, new, more cautious leaders, like a company called Hello Bike, who cleverly stayed out of that initial crazy war, have risen up to create a stable, genuinely useful public service.
So we end up with this really big, thought-provoking question. The bike-sharing story looks like a total failure on the surface, but what it left behind is a permanent, valuable service. It follows the pattern we see over and over again in tech, this huge boom of irrational investment, a really painful bust, and then a stable, useful industry rising from the rubble. So maybe, is all that chaos just the price we have to pay for rapid, transformative innovation? It's definitely something to think about.